Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Today we're the author of an important new book about all the stories that are making our community tick or burying the truth. His name is Stephen Brill, founder of Court TV. Some people here know him in New Haven as a person who teaches a important journalism class at Yale and funds the Journalism Initiative. And he has a new book out called The Death of Truth: How Social Media and the Internet Gave Snake Oil Salesmen and Demagogues the Weapons They Needed to Destroy Trust and Polarize the world, and what we can do about it. Knopf published it. It's out. It's getting a lot of attention. Stephen Brill, thanks for making time for coming on Dateline New Haven. How you doing?
Happy to do it. Nice to be with you again.
And I see you have the book prominently to your right.
That's what my publisher has taught me, yes.
And you got the Teamsters next to it, which was the book you wrote early in your career and really made a name for yourself about corruption in the union.
Correct.
My one question about your bookshelf is, where's the Power Broker?
It's, I think, like right behind my head. But it's.
Do you remember when the pandemic started and everybody was on Zoom and they wrote an article at Times of the Journal about how everybody's bookcase always prominently showed the Power Broker? Because that was the signifier of seriousness.
I had it on my bookcase until forever.
So, Steve Brill, how's your book doing? Is it getting the attention you hope? Are you making an impact on this debate?
So good. It's it's a little hard to break into the world today, but that's part of what I'm writing about. But no, so far I'm quite gratified.
So basically, your book has two main parts. You're identifying the challenge facing our society now, where whether it's pink slime sites or on social media, people are deliberately inventing fake stories that are overwhelming our screen and our debate and our common understanding of fact and our ability to debate. And that what's going to get lost is that we can't trust any of our information as civil society breaks down. You work on that every day on your latest project, NewsGuard, which is a company that monitors the news sites on the web and rates them about whether you can trust them and helps us parse that out. Steve, what gave you the idea to tackle this in an old school print book? How did you conclude that would be one avenue for fighting back against misinformation on the web?
Well, I really just decided that the world I had seen since we started NewsGuard in 2018 was a world that had really changed. And I wanted to try to put it all together and explain it in a book, which I find is one way, along with the endlessly long magazine articles I've written over my lifetime, to really put things together in print. And I think whether you're reading the print online or you're reading it in a book, that's really the only way you can present sort of the full picture. And the picture I present has to do with two forces of technology which were originally thought to be great breakthroughs. One is, obviously the social media platforms and the way they have replaced for so many people all other sources of news and information, which is not a good thing. And also something that most of your listeners probably don't know about and don't appreciate, which is programmatic advertising, which is advertising that is done by auction and by algorithm, not placed because somebody's decided the New Haven Independent is a credible place to have my ad. It's a good environment, it's reliable, and people will be more inclined to take my ad for my product seriously in the New Haven Independent as opposed to in the New Haven Independent.news, which is a website I've just made up as we're talking, which would be a pink slime site, which is a site posing as important local news, but spewing out all varieties of hoaxes and propaganda, but getting, if they do it the right way, more advertising than you're going to get.
And obviously we care about that for two reasons. You are helping advertisers who, let's say, have an insurance company, a healthcare company, a legitimate organization that would never want to have their ads next to a fake site selling scams about using bleach to get rid of COVID, but they end up there because of how this automated, large-scale, programmatic advertising works. But I guess the bigger, you spend a lot of time on it in the book, but the sense I got is why it matters even more to society at large is that I think you're arguing that to the extent that advertising is going to continue supporting news, the programmatic advertising is leading advertising to support the wrong kind of news, disinformation, fake stories, pink slime sites.
$2.6 billion a year or two ago when we did the last study of this went to sites rated by NewsGuard as highly unreliable. And that's all advertising that should have gone and could have gone to sites that are reliable and that actually pay real reporters to do real journalism. So, just to give your listeners an example that'll probably surprise them, a couple of years ago, the largest single advertiser on Sputnik News, which is the Russian propaganda site, was Warren Buffett. Now, Warren Buffett did not wake up every morning and say, how do I send Vladimir Putin more money? It's because he owns, among other things, the Geico insurance company, which does a massive amount of programmatic advertising. And neither Warren Buffett or Geico or anybody in the executive suite there had the vaguest idea that they were sending money to support Russian propaganda instead of having their money go to reliable sites. There are two special ironies there. One is obviously Buffett is an icon of American capitalism, not Russian propaganda. And second, Geico stands for Government Employees Insurance Company, and it was founded to sell insurance at a good price to members of the armed forces who were actually, fighting our adversaries. So the idea that that money from Geico goes to Russia is just, totally illustrative of the absurdity.
And of course, Buffett bought the Buffalo News and some other papers on an earlier version of trying to rescue journalism. Then he gave up on that. Did Warren Buffett get back to you when your organization revealed how his money was being spent?
Yeah, his ad agency said, well, it's just a glitch, we'll fix it. But that's one of the problems is the ad agencies don't want to admit that they've been screwing up for all these years since they invented programmatic advertising.
So, Steve Brill, not just the programmatic advertising, but also pink slime and the overall barrage of daily fake news, made-up news, foreign propaganda. How deep is this problem, and how different is it from the past when everyday Americans had to figure out what was real news and what people were lying about and faking? What are we facing now, and how is it different?
It's especially acute when it comes to local news. Local news traditionally has been the news medium that most Americans, indeed most people in Western democracies, tend to trust the most because it's closest to them. And if you're a local news outlet, as you well know, if you get something wrong, people are going to know it, and because they're very close to it. And if you misspell the name of a street in New Haven, everybody's going to laugh at you because they know the name of that street in New Haven. So the idea that there are now, as of this week, believe it or not, there are more websites that we call pink slime sites posing as local news, but actually operated and financed by political action committees on the left and on the right. And an additional new player are the Russians, who are also financing these sites. So just think of how that undermines something like the New Haven Independent.
And obviously you're aiming much higher. In addition to undermining us, I think you make the argument that you're undermining civil society and prospects of democracy in our country if you can't trust on a common set of facts, correct?
Right, because people want to, in the past, people welcome the idea that liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans could have debates, but they'd at least start out debating over the same core set of facts.
And Stephen Brill is the author of The Death of Truth, about how social media and the internet gave snake oil salesmen and demagogues the weapons to destroy, trust, and polarize the world. We're talking to him on Dateline New Haven and WNHH-FM. I had my ditto head moment when I read this book. You remember Rush Limbaugh had the ditto heads when they go, yeah, 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 ditto, ditto. I was excited to see that you have many villains in this book, including a guy who fled the authorities in this country to become the leader of Putin's effort to do fake news here, and he actually had death threats sent to you, and we'll talk about that a little later. But my favorite villain in the book is not a person. Early on, a villain of your book is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. When Congress, in the early days of the internet, before we were all using these social media platforms, said, and tell me if I'm saying this right, made it law that if you have a site where a lot of people are posting comments, you cannot be sued for libel. You're just a convener. And the thought was, there's another policy issue you deal with about not giving the wrong incentives to people trying to run responsibly. But overall, it basically said we'll lose the public square. We recently had some Yale law students and professors who are trying to reform this act, who also are making this argument that we still need some version of this to protect the publishers because we want to have this free open square. And the reason I was cheering that you were showing how destructive this was, you were showing that what has happened since is these Facebook, Twitter, they become monsters that continually are spreading information based on an algorithm that rewards fake information, that rewards deliberate untruths, that get people riled up, that destroy people's lives and careers. That's actually the business model. It's not a public square. And what gets me as a publisher is I love the fact that as a very tiny news organization, the New Haven Independent needs a libel lawyer. And we know that if we print information without being responsible about it that can destroy someone's life, we can be sued, and we should. But meanwhile, the biggest publishers now in the world, who publish the most information and every day are destroying people's lives with fake information, Congress, through this act, has prevented them from being able to be sued and being held accountable while they continue with a business model that rewards them for doing it. Is that an accurate way of how you put it in your book?
Yeah, you said it better than I did. One thing I'll add, just for context, is Section 230, when it was passed in 1996, it was 3 paragraphs in a multi-hundred-page telecommunications reform bill meant to provide some regulatory scrutiny to the nascent cell phone industry and cable television industries. Had nothing to do with social media platforms. It was added at the last minute with no notice. You can search through the archives of any newspaper you want to, and you won't see a mention of Section 230. It was passed because, as you put it, there were also these dial-up services, AOL, CompuServe, and Prodigy, which had a few 100,000 people each, a small minority of whom used the services not just for email, but to go into chat rooms where they could talk to people about personal finance or the New York Yankees or restaurants, all different kinds of chat rooms. And one person went into one of these chat rooms and said something libelous and defamatory about someone, and that person sued. And the defense of the dial-up company, I think it was Prodigy, was, well, we don't do anything to screen our content. We're just a public square. People just come here and say whatever they want. We shouldn't be responsible any more than the phone company should be responsible if you get on the telephone and say something bad to somebody else about somebody. A second company also got sued, and they had advertised as a consumer benefit that they actually do screen their content. So they want their content to be as accurate as it can be and not as harmful. And they were held liable because they do screen their content. So members of Congress said, well, that doesn't make any sense. The good guys who are trying to screen the content are liable, and the bad guys who don't screen anything are not liable. Let's even the playing field. And how did they even the playing field? By making everybody immune from liability, even the ones who screen the content.
And we understood from your book why they did it at the time. It was bipartisan. They didn't understand what role. But would you agree that now those platforms have become publishers, just like we're publishers?
Now it's a fiasco. Remember, at the time, there were, a couple 100,000 people sending a few messages a day. Now you have, people in the billions, posting billions of messages and videos every minute. So it's totally different. And then, as you point out, and as I go into great detail in the book, the algorithms were geared to make you want to stay on the platform, which means they had the most inflammatory, crazy stuff that they asked you to read. And the more crazy stuff you read, the more crazy stuff they sent you. So the book begins with a profile of a young woman who is out in Silicon Valley. She's a techie and she has a newborn baby, and she goes online on Facebook just to sort of find out the basics of what kind of vaccine regime she should have for her newborn. And she's stunned to find this vicious, violent debate online about, something as benign as a measles vaccine. She can't believe it. And she texts a few of her friends who work at these platforms, says, what's up with your recommendation algorithm? And they basically tell her, well, that's the way it works.
And then, as you point out in the book, and every day there are new stories. The Journal had a great story yesterday about the mom of a girl who had a site that the algorithm rewarded creepy men who wanted to have sexual interest in her site, and how that's working. You brought up an issue about scale, because a lot of times people say we can't change it back. Because I've talked to Rich Blumenthal about this, who's leading the charge on 230, and even he doesn't want to get rid of this protection necessarily. And they're worried about losing that public square. You write in the book, why is he... Because they're sorry that if a human being had to go after every post, every video before they post it, you humanly couldn't do it. Like the New York Times has to pick which stories it has comments on to read them. The Independent, that's like the main thing we do almost, is read the comments to make sure we read every one of them. But then you say, why do they need to post 2,500 videos a minute? Why did Facebook have to allow more than 1 billion posts a day? So when I read that, here's how I reacted, Steve. I said, why do we need... Is it really having a public square enabling media to operate at that scale where there's 1 billion posts a day or 2,500 videos a minute? That's actually not a public square, because the only way that can happen without libel protection is if a machine does not, instead of a human being, reviews it and the wrong stuff still gets through. Is there any
Exactly right.
is there any
Exactly.
positive is there any positive purpose in having...
Well, one of the things I say in the book is that, who decided that it's a wonderful thing that someone can post instantaneously a mass killing at a mosque in New Zealand, or can post instantaneously to the world, let's all come to the Capitol this afternoon and have a riot? Why is that a good thing? And the issue of capacity, whenever I bring this up, people say, yeah, but that's their business. They need to have that scale. Well, let's think about that for a minute. If you walk into a restaurant after we finish this conversation, you'll see in the restaurant a sign that says capacity by more than 130 people is dangerous and unlawful, right? What if the restaurant said, so many people want to eat here that I have to let that 1,000 people can? Well, no, that's a safety violation. By the same token, if you're a platform, you should be responsible for the safety of your product. Elon Musk is responsible for the safety of his cars, his Teslas, but he's not responsible for the safety of his platform. What if he said, so many people want to buy a Tesla that I really can't be bothered with slowing down and cutting into my profit margins by installing these pesky seatbelts and airbags, let alone fixing the software so the car doesn't drive off a cliff. No one would allow him to do that. Why is that allowed to happen just because something calls itself a social media platform?
So, Steve,
why is that a wonderful...
And Steve, very constructively, at the end of the book, you have a long section about ideas for addressing the problem. You admit from the beginning that there's no one silver bullet, that it's all stuff we got to try. To my surprise, you did not call for eliminating Section 230. You said it's not worth the price of the platforms nervously policing content to avoid publishing anything negative, even if it is true or just an opinion, and having to defend endless suits from offended people. But why would that be different from the Dominion suits with Fox?
Well, what you left out was the context in which I said it. What I said was you could have a reform of Section 230 that says if you use an algorithm to steer people to certain kinds of content, then you are an editor and then you are liable. So that is one reform I suggest. Then in the next breath, I say, however, waiting for Congress to do something in Section 230 is not the solution, since Congress can't even name a post office.
Yeah.
I do suggest is that right in front of us, right there, right now, there is a step that the federal government can take. The Federal Trade Commission enforces promises that people make to consumers. And if you go to Facebook, you will see it lists its terms of service. Its terms of service say, we will not allow harmful misinformation, state-sponsored disinformation, hate speech, bullying, violent content. We will not tolerate it. Well, they're violating those terms of service. That terms of service is a contract. And the FTC could sue them this afternoon for that violation, just the way they have sued them for violating the privacy promises that they make in those exact same terms of service.
Do you feel the FTC has the capacity to do that job?
Sure, that's easily.
Okay. Because I wonder whether lawyers, you've got a whole cottage industry spread up. If you just got rid of 230, you're saying it's just not realistic. Like, would there be in a perfect world, would you like to have Section 230 completely removed?
Well, no, because it really wouldn't. It would give them an excuse to enact all kinds of blocking of content without really a payoff. So, for example, let's take the way Facebook and other platforms were clearly responsible for, the crowds that formed at the Capitol on January 6th, let alone the sentiment of those crowds that formed at the Capitol on January 6th. Where's the lawsuit there? If you eliminate Section 230, who's got the liability for what? Maybe whoever the proprietor of the Capitol grounds is can sue for damages, but you and I can't sue for damages for.
I agree. I'm thinking more of the case like the election workers saying the mother and daughter are passing by crack and that kind of stuff.
Yes, they should be able to do that. And the way I've done it, by saying if you have an algorithm, then you're not immune from liability, they would be able to.
So you're arguing, and I think it's a great point, Steve, that algorithm is editing. So that's what an editor does. So that point is very well taken. I'm also wondering whether just publishing is publishing. In other words, I don't see what we lose if they get. I would argue that already the algorithms they use to now try to enforce their standards get it wrong all the time. The Independent, we get pulled. We get kicked off YouTube and Facebook for things about gardening or stuff that has nothing to do with controversial content because of the way they go at it. I'm still trying to struggle to figure out what would be lost. So if they get too nervous about publishing stuff because they don't want to be responsible to create a safe product, they don't have capacity because of the scale, what would be wrong with going back to the original promise of the internet where there wasn't just a few gatekeepers like Facebook and others that reached the most eyeballs? If we just said that lawyers will put them out of business because their business model is fundamentally corrupt and evil, and that you could just go back to having only scalable sites where you can be responsible about what you publish.
There's another reform you could do. For example, you could say that it is impossible for a social media platform to be safe if it can't screen its content. And therefore, you can't have more than X number of people posting X number of posts over this period of time. Now, if you say that, people say, oh my God, that's going to hurt the Facebook business model. Well, so what?
Yeah.
Again, what if you have a car company whose business model is let's not have seatbelts or airbags?
Yes, the Corsair. We're talking to Stephen Brill, The Death of Truth. He's the author. He's trying to do something about the scourge of pink slime and other efforts at disinformation that are limiting truth in our public discourse. Let me bring up another point you brought up, Steve. You talked about how the vast number of views are the reward for promoting disinformation, whether it's just to make money based on scandals or like Alex Jones selling products, or more dangerously when Vladimir Putin is specifically trying to put fake stories out there. We know that a lot of those views aren't real, that the bots multiply how many people are seeing it, right? So if something says it got like on Twitter when Musk came in, his own team discovered that a lot of that was bots. What I'm wondering, when you look at that, and it's often not real people, does that make it less scary because it means it's not the true number of people? Or does that make it scarier because those larger fake numbers of audience drive decisions about advertising and political action?
I think it's the latter. I think it makes it scarier because it provides more financial support. But just to give you an example of how the platform's algorithms have combined with programmatic advertising to destroy journalism, threaten to destroy journalism. You remember when Nancy Pelosi's husband got attacked, right? He was attacked in their home in San Francisco, and a website called the Santa Monica Observer did a story. The Santa Monica Observer is something NewsGuard had identified a couple of years before as being a completely hoax site in it for the programmatic advertising. Why had we identified them? Well, among the stories, the big scoops they got was one that Hillary Clinton had died in 2015, and a body double had substituted for her in the 2016 debates with President Trump. So that's the Santa Monica Observer, posing as a local newspaper for the Santa Monica, California community. So the night that Pelosi gets attacked, the Santa Monica Observer does a story saying that he was actually the victim of an encounter with a gay prostitute. Totally false, totally made up. Elon Musk quickly retweeted it because the Santa Monica Observer tweeted its headline, which will take us back to programmatic advertising in a second. So Musk retweets it, Don Jr. retweets it, it immediately goes viral. And because what they were retweeting was the headline from the Santa Monica Observer with the link back to the Santa Monica Observer website, the Santa Monica Observer website instantly gets hundreds of thousands of page views that they would not have had. What happens to those hundreds of thousands of page views? They all get programmatic advertising from Hertz Rent-A-Car, from your favorite soft drink, from your favorite insurance company, from the U.S. Post Office. They're all advertising next to the Paul Pelosi story. So the Santa Monica Observer, rings the cash register, makes all kinds of money. Guess who doesn't get that money? The San Francisco Chronicle, which hires real reporters to write real stories, including what actually happened to Paul Pelosi.
And that's obviously, I think you and I would agree that is evil because people are still believing that Paul Pelosi story. There's also that element you brought up.
Financial incentive for that evil.
When you brought up, there's that other element of just crazy, ridiculous, made-up stories that go viral, like you brought up that Hillary Clinton, the body double. You and I remember before the age of social media and the internet that it was two supermarket tabloids, to some extent the National Examiner, more places like Weekly World News, that had regular stories about President Clinton meeting with an alien or the body doubles and people are really dead. And in those days, I would argue that even though National Enquirer might have had 10 times the readership of, let's say, the New York Times, the New York Times had more impact because its readers are more engaged. People kind of believed it didn't really take action in what they read in the National Enquirer was a problem, but that you didn't have to have the same number of readers to be as influential. Now I want to ask you a question about scale. Now the scale is much different. The New York Times has been a big success with the internet, right? They're now at 10 million readers when they used to be under 1 million, so 10 times as many people read it. But there are also many more than 10 times as many people getting these stories about aliens and body doubles and Paul Pelosi. So is it just the scale that makes the issue different from before?
No, it's the environment and it's the context. And what I mean by that is, here's the reason we started NewsGuard. Imagine you walk into a library today and you see books and magazines neatly arranged by subject matter. You pick up the book, you read the book jacket, you can see who the author is, you see who the publisher is. You pick up the magazine, you look at the masthead. You pick up the newspaper, you can tell the difference between the National Enquirer and the Philadelphia Inquirer just by picking them up and looking at them. Now imagine instead you walked into a library, just 1 million pieces of paper flying around in the air. You pluck one out of the air, you start reading it. You don't know who wrote it, you don't know who's financing it, you don't know what their credentials are, and most of all, there's no librarian who can guide you and tell you, hey, here's the background of this versus the background of that. Here's what you should want to read if you want a liberal perspective on the minimum wage or you want a conservative perspective. The internet is pure chaos. So the Santa Monica Observer headline looked like a headline from the San Francisco Chronicle. So if the Santa Monica Observer headline kind of intrigues you, and it is intriguing to see the scoop about, Paul Pelosi, you click on it. So it's not the idea of brands on the internet is very different. Yes, the New York Times has a brand, but I'm telling you, I could create the New Haven Independent .news tomorrow. I could make the typeface and everything look exactly like your website, except I would say, that Paul Bass, just got arrested and is being hauled off to jail.
And hopefully you'll help me out with the bail. Steve Brill is the author of The Death of Truth. And you got death threats trying to fight the death of truth. Your organization that exposes fake sites got into how Russian propaganda is coming to society, fake sites run by a man who was run out of our country because he was going to be arrested for fraud. And he's operating all these fake sites. He then, the authorities found out, was behind death threats being sent to you and your family. You now have 12 motion detecting security cameras surrounding your house. How are you dealing with that? Does that make you feel your life has changed because of this work, Steve? What does it make you feel about how you're going to go forward next?
My life hasn't changed that much. I mean, yes, we got threats, but nothing materialized. I mean, I'm someone who started out my career with a book about the Teamsters Union and still bodyguards for 2 or 3 weeks after.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I guess I could say I'm kind of used to it, but I don't want to over dramatize it.
One thing they did is you got hauled. Jim Jordan targeted you and the Republicans in Congress because some of these fake stories about NewsGuard then got picked up by the Washington Examiner, which is sort of a legitimate news site in Washington. And one thing you were attacked for was being an arm of the U.S. government, which wasn't true. And it is true that you had a contract from the Defense Department so they can help find out certain information about the media. Do you think that...
No, not about the media. That sounds like, the American media.
Yeah.
The contract was very specific, walled off. It was, we help them through our data process trace the source outside the United States of Russian, Iranian, and Chinese disinformation campaigns.
Right.
It has nothing to do with domestic news sources.
And that's why, it obviously was untrue to call you guys an agent of the government. I mean, Elon Musk has a lot of government contracts that are a lot more questionable than that when he can decide how the Ukraine war is going to go with his satellites. My question to you is whether you think you left yourself open to an unfair attack that could screw up your organization by taking a legitimate Defense Department contract.
Well, in retrospect, yes, but I would still do it because I'm proud of that work that we do. And calling us government funded, that's about 2 or 3% of our revenue. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the equivalent of saying Verizon is government funded because, units of the U.S. government use their telephone systems.
Or 2 to 3% of our revenue is legal notices from the government.
Well, there you go. You're
right.
Government funded.
Right. Okay. One big threat, obviously, you get to in the book that can't be ignored is you're saying this the stakes get even higher with the advent of artificial intelligence because of deep fakes. We now have started being able to have like phone calls from Joe Biden's voice telling you not to vote. Or, it's going to be part of every campaign and all these stories where you think you see the person actually doing and saying something they're not doing. So I have another one of those either or questions to ask you. Do you think it's possible, as with other kinds of deep fakes in the future that weren't AI, we'll go through a transition period where people will get used to what's fake and substance will win out? Or is it just going to be what Putin tries to do, which is not to convince you of something that isn't true, but just to have you believe that nothing is true? Is that the real game here, and will AI make that deeper?
Well, I think my answer because the title of my book is The Death of Truth. So I think the effort is to believe that nothing is true. And one of the issues with AI is sort of the converse of people believing something that's fake, which is people not believing something that's true. So the example I use is in 2024, if the Access Hollywood tape from 2016, the one where Trump is grabbing a woman or is bragging about grabbing a woman, if that came out today as opposed to 8 years ago, Trump would simply say that's just a deep fake.
And there'd
It's
be a
just
deep
someone-
fake out about Biden saying the same thing.
Yeah, and we wouldn't quite know what to believe, would we? I mean, would we really know for sure it's not a deep fake?
So in your book, you come up with a lot of suggestions that you'd like to see happen. We talked about a couple of them, amending Section 230 slightly, for instance, to have algorithms called as editing and have the FTC enforce the contracts. You want to end online anonymity. You want to require reporting on campaign documents if pink slime sites are being used. You want to license AI and require an ID to let people know. And more broadly in society, you want instant runoff, ranked choice voting so that you can have better discussion ballot initiative to end gerrymandering. What did you think about the Surgeon General yesterday saying that we also should have warning labels?
I thought that was absolutely right.
And
Totally right.
And what do you want people to... I'm
I
sorry.
had suggested myself, although I kind of did in the book because I quoted him as talking a lot about the healthcare related threat of social media platforms. I mean, one number that sticks in my mind, I can't resist not repeating to you, is the number 225,000. That's the number of people in the United States who would not have died from COVID if the take-up rate for the COVID vaccine had been the usual 90% take-up rate of other important vaccines. And that happened because there was such a disinformation and misinformation campaign saying the COVID vaccine will kill you.
Okay, and then so what do you want people to do, Steve Brill, after they read your book?
Do all the things I suggested in the last chapter, including, file their own complaint with the FTC that the social media platforms are violating their terms of service.
And how about starting their own news sites that are real news sites?
That would be great.
Okay.
It'd be an inspiration.
Well, your book was an inspiration. Thank you, Steve Brill, for writing this book and the work you do at NewsGuard. The book is The Death of Truth. It's about social media, the internet, and snake oil salesmen and the efforts to destroy trust and polarize the world. It's published by Knopf. It's out now. You can get it. You can go to NewsGuard on the internet. And Steve Brill, thanks so much for taking so much time out of your busy schedule to chat with us on Dateline New Haven.
Quite welcome. Great to catch up.
And thanks to
Bye-bye.
Harry Droz, our station manager. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.